gameranx presents another episode of Before You Buy, the show where we give you some straight up gameplay and some of our thoughts on the latest games releasing. And today we're talking about Prey. Look, I'm that guy. You've probably heard me complain about this before, but I was in that group of people who were super hyped for the original Prey 2 that was canceled a few years ago for the sake of this reboot of the franchise. While I will say I still wish we got that cool Star Wars-y game, this Prey is absolutely worthwhile. Way more than I even expected. Like the modern Dishonored or Deus Ex, this is a PC gamer thinking man's game. By that I mean it fills that weird void of like specific technical games in the mid-90s to early 2000s. Prey definitely surprised me by how much of its influences it wears on its sleeve. The elevator pitch is 100% Bioshock and System Shock combined with Half-Life. While it doesn't totally live up to those names, it's absolutely fun and challenging to play. I think the game starts off simple enough, and it actually may seem initially a little bit disappointing. I'm talking to you guys, you're hardcore, you don't mess around, you probably played the demo and seen the first big reveal twist. It's really incredibly effective because it sets the stage, gets you asking more questions, and gives you the reason to really seek out the answers to those questions. But for a while, I think things just kind of peter along. They just move along. You know, you creep from room to room, smashing things with your wrench, and it kind of just feels a little bit aimless. But I guarantee you, things definitely do pick up after that first hour. It picks up partially because of the alien abilities you gain. You spend points in, the typical RPG fashion to gain strength, hacking, and engineering skill stuff, but it's not until you can really embrace the Typhon enemy and use their skills to your advantage in the game that it really gets turned up to 11. Not just for the gameplay scenarios, but for the story and setting itself. It just makes the game feel a bit more unique, and it needs it. Scenarios were pretty good from the outset, but it really changes when you can shoot kinetic energy blasts or use telekinesis or transform into objects. That's when the game really comes into its own. The setting of the game is probably one of the more interesting things. The majority of the game takes place on Talos 1. This is like a space station research facility that may as well be Rapture in space with less civilians, but I will say, it's gorgeous. I didn't find the visuals that great most of the time. This footage is on a PS4 Pro, but thankfully the PC version seems to run fine as well. But the design and look of the environments really make up for things. Talos 1 is kind of glamorous and unnerving at the same time. It's lonely, but it's full of stuff. There's lots of stuff everywhere. And Prey really does shine in its level design. There are always multiple ways to tackle things, to accomplish objectives, to sneak around places, etc., etc. It's not as obvious as some other recent games with multiple approach options, but it feels damn good, and it rewards the different skill sets you might try and level up and embrace. That is absolutely the good stuff. The combat itself, I'm not the biggest fan of always. The idea is that the low-level alien Typhon entities are mimics, and that's cool enough. Enemies can disguise themselves as coffee mugs, chairs, potted plants, anything. The game does give you more tools later on to detect them, but it still manages to always really keep you on your toes. You'll always find yourself slowly making your way through areas, creeping around, never running around carefree. Even when you're more powerful later on, you're still always going to be cautious. These mimic enemies will hide and warp into an object, and while the jump scare cues don't always work, they're not always right, and sometimes they're grating, I do appreciate that it always makes the game a challenge. The encounters themselves, though, aren't always that great. Me, personally, I'm just not a fan of blindly swinging a melee weapon at something near the ground. It just never feels good, and you're going to be doing that a lot, at least in the early hours of the game. The first-person controls are fine, but the sensitivity never really feels quite right. But thankfully, the combat does get better as you face new enemies like the Phantoms and stuff, and things get a little bit more inventive. And then there's new weapons that really force you to use your brain and certain combined tactics to defeat these guys. That stuff works, but sometimes it also devolves into trial and error, which may be disappointing to some. However, the game does really embrace that trial and error, giving you the Quicksave ability, even on consoles. I will say the weapons lack any impact or satisfying feel, but since many of them have kind of clever, multi-layered uses, then I can forgive that somewhat. The combat is frustrating, but at least challenging, and successful at least in the sense that it's always making you consider your approach. Even the low-level enemies, like I said, are extremely dangerous, and it makes you think about every single encounter. Every single one has weight, considering the various resources you use for healing and crafting ammo are really scarce, almost like survival horror level scarce. Everything in this game is important and calculated, from the combat to the chipsets you give your suit to the neuromods you upgrade yourself with, and it all feels really good. It also makes things tense and often a bit scary. Not only are you squaring off with monsters, but embracing some of their abilities actually makes you less human yourself. That story ramification stuff I don't want to totally get into, but it makes you think about every single system in the game effectively. That, along with the aesthetic, makes for some pretty good sci-fi stuff. The story itself can feel light at times, but it is solid. The bones are good. They're enough to keep you going and asking questions. There's also plenty more if you're willing to dig deep, and I'm impressed. Arcane really created a world full of employees, notes, emails, and sticky notes that are actually interesting and often rewarding. The story as a whole, while seemingly kind of like minimalist at first, does gain momentum as you keep going, and this adventure will most likely take you well above 15 hours, depending on your playstyle and difficulty. But in summation, Prey is weird, scary, difficult, frustrating, and interesting. It seriously does feel like BioShock or Half-Life, not just in the gameplay mechanics, but in the setup, story, and the mysteries as well. For me, like I said earlier, it doesn't quite reach the lofty heights of those previous games. It doesn't have exactly the same spark or uniqueness, and that's going to be lost on some a lot, but that is of course completely up to my taste compared to yours. Regardless, I do think this is worth a playthrough if you're a fan of these types of games. Even if the story doesn't hook you, I think the gameplay systems will. This isn't quite an action first-person shooter or a space RPG or totally a stealth game. It's somewhere in between, and it just might click with you. And most likely, the cool 80s synth music will definitely help. But that's Prey, and that's a before you buy. You guys know how this works by now. I give you some pros, some cons, and some personal opinion, but now I absolutely want to hear yours down in the comments. If you've been playing Prey, definitely let me know what you think so far. Let me know any secrets you've come across, some weird gameplay elements that are really sticking with you, any moments that scared the pants off you. Let's talk about that stuff. If you haven't been playing Prey and you're on the outside looking in, let me know what you think after watching this video. I want to hear from you as well. If you got any more questions for me though, I'll be down in the comments answering your questions as much as possible, but I'll also be on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Jake Baldino as well. You guys know the deal though, coming around here, clicking the like button helps us out so much and we really appreciate it. But subscribing if you're new is also a good idea because we put out videos like this every single day. But as always, thanks for watching and we'll see you guys next time.
Untitled Chapter.